Have you ever said or done something and immediately wished you could take it back? Most of us have. Something catches us off guard, emotions rise, we speak or act too quickly, and sometimes almost immediately we regret it. You may have heard the phrase mind the gap. It's commonly used as a warning on train platforms, reminding passengers to watch the small space between the platform and the train. There's a similar gap in our inner lives. It is the brief space between a thought and a response. Today, we're going to explore that small but powerful space. We are going to mind the gap. We will look at why it is so easy to miss, what can happen when we become more aware of it, and how learning to pause within it can change the way we listen, communicate, and relate to the people all around us. The gap may be small, but becoming more present within it can, over time, change our lives and the way we interact with the world. This is a Karen Shaw podcast where we expand the mind and grow the heart. I'm Karen Shaw. Let's get started. To better understand the gap, think about a green room. A green room is a place where a speaker, performer, or guest waits before stepping onto a stage or appearing in front of an audience. The preparation has been done. What comes next will be seen and heard by others. But before that happens, there is a brief holding space. The psychological gap that we have works in much the same way. A thought or impulse is present within us. Before it becomes a response that goes out into the world, there is a brief space. That space is the gap. Just as a green room offers a pause before someone steps in front of an audience, the gap offers a pause before our words or actions are expressed. What happens in that space may be private, but what comes out of it is not. Our tone, our words, our expression, and our actions all move from that private space into the lives of other people. That is why the gap matters. It gives us a moment to notice what is happening within us before our response enters the world. For many years, I wasn't aware of the gap at all. I moved through that space with speed, knee-jerk reactions, curt remarks, and a lot of words and behaviors that were obviously not given much thought. For me, the gap was unfamiliar territory, and when I first gave some thought to the space between thought and response, it was not comfortable territory either. It sounded like something pulled from a textbook. Take a deep breath, count to 10, and then go ahead and do whatever you're going to do anyway. It felt a little bit like psychobabble. But over time, I began to understand that the gap was not simply a delay. There was a tenderness and beauty in it. It was not a place to rush through. It was a place to enter with consideration and care. And I began to recognize that this space was not just a break between what we think and what we do, but it was a space where relationships can be protected, where words can be softened, and wisdom can enter. One of the greatest gifts I discovered in the gap was becoming a better listener. For many of us, listening is not really listening. We are waiting to tell our story, explain our position, or offer the point we have already decided needs to be made. The other person may still be speaking, but part of our mind has already left the conversation. We are building our response. That was something I noticed in myself. I could be physically present, looking at the person, appearing to listen, while internally preparing what I wanted to say next. But when I began to pay closer attention to the gap, something changed. I learned to let a response form without immediately releasing it. I could notice a thought, hold it for a moment, then return my attention to the person who was still speaking. Sometimes the response would come back. Sometimes it would change or disappear completely. It became a small inner dance. Listen, thought, listen again. And the more I practiced that movement, the less urgency I felt to comment on everything. I began to understand that listening does not require me to be silent only until it is my turn to speak. Listening means allowing another person's thoughts to exist without immediately placing my own thoughts on top of them. That is not always easy. Sometimes we want to correct the details or defend ourselves. Sometimes we are certain that our experience, our advice, or our interpretation will improve what is being said. And sometimes it will, but not always. There are moments when people are not asking us to fix or analyze the situation. They may not even be asking for our opinion. They simply need enough room to finish their own thought. The gap gives them that room. It also gives us the chance to ask a better question. What does this person need right now? Advice and answer? Or do they simply need to know that someone is willing to stay present and listen? When we remain in the gap long enough to ask that question, our response often changes. And sometimes the answer is no response at all. Not because we have nothing to offer, but because our presence may be more valuable than our opinion. That is one of the quiet lessons the gap has taught me. The need to speak is not always the same as having something to say. Sometimes wisdom speaks, sometimes wisdom waits, and sometimes wisdom simply listens. And when we learn the difference, our conversations become gentler, our relationships become safer, and the people around us feel more deeply heard. It sounds simple, but there is real psychology behind it. So why is this gap so easy to miss? The human brain is always trying to make life more efficient. It looks for patterns, remembers what has happened before, and prepares us for familiar responses. That is useful. We couldn't move through everyday life if we had to carefully reconsider every thought and action. But as we discussed in episode 35, Your Brain is Not Your Boss, the first thought that appears does not automatically deserve control over what happens next. The first response is not always the one that serves us best. It may simply be the response we have practiced the most. If we are accustomed to defending ourselves, defense arrives quickly. If we often interrupt, the interruption may be out before we have noticed it. If we usually offer advice, our minds may begin to build a solution before the other person has finished speaking. The gap gives us a moment to notice that familiar response before it becomes words or action. Psychologists use the term executive functions to describe abilities that help us guide our attention and behavior. One of these abilities is called inhibitory control. That sounds technical, but the idea is simple. It allows us to experience an impulse without immediately acting on it. Having a thought is not the same as saying it. Feeling angry is not the same as attacking. Wanting to correct someone is not the same as needing to correct them. An impulse gives us information. It does not have to become an instruction. The gap gives us a chance to recognize the difference. Research on mindfulness supports this idea, although the findings also keep us realistic. A large review published in 2024 examined more than 100 randomized studies of mindfulness training. It found small overall improvements in several areas of thinking, including attention and executive control. The important word here is small. A pause is not magic. Mindfulness does not turn us into perfectly calm people, and simply counting to 10 doesn't guarantee a thoughtful response. We can count to 10 while building a stronger argument. We can remain quiet on the outside while becoming more reactive on the inside. The goal is not simply silence here. The goal is to become aware of what is happening within us. One useful process that can occur within the gap is affect labeling. Now, that's a technical term again for putting a feeling into words. Now, this is important. We say, I'm angry, I'm embarrassed, I'm becoming defensive. Research suggests that simply naming what we are feeling can create distance from it. The feeling doesn't disappear, but instead of being completely caught inside it, we begin to observe it. Rather than being carried by defensiveness, we can recognize that we're becoming defensive. That small act of recognition can help us become more present before the feeling moves into our words or actions. And this becomes especially important in our closest relationships. A familiar tone, an old disagreement, or a certain kind of comment can bring the past into the present. Suddenly, we may be reacting not only to what was just said, but also to everything the moment reminds us of. The gap gives us a chance to notice that. What am I responding to right now? Is it this conversation? Or is it an old experience entering the conversation with me? That recognition alone can change the direction of an interaction. Without it, two people may believe they are speaking about the present while each is responding to a history the other person can't see. At first, noticing the gap may feel like a slight hesitation, a small delay before words form. It is not something we have to manufacture. The gap is already there. We are learning to recognize it. And once we recognize it, there is a little more room. Room to hear what was actually said. Room to notice what we are feeling. To understand that not every impulse needs to become speech. That room may feel uncomfortable at first. Silence may seem too long. The urge to fill it may be strong. But over time, the gap begins to feel less like empty space and more like a space where understanding can take shape before a response. The gap doesn't remove emotion. It changes our relationship with emotion. Our first thought, feeling, or impulse may still arrive quickly, but we are no longer completely inside the automatic flow of reaction. That is why this small space matters. The mind expands because we are no longer carried automatically by the first response that appears. And the heart grows because we make room for understanding, both for ourselves and for the people in front of us. So how do we begin practicing this? Don't try to change every reaction at once. Begin by noticing the gap. The first goal is not perfection here. The first goal is recognition. When you become aware of that small space between a thought and a response, remember these three words: pause, name, return. First, pause. You don't need to remain silent for 10 minutes. Sometimes one breath is enough. Don't release the first sentence yet. Do not send the email yet. Allow your body to become still for just a moment. That small pause interrupts the automatic movement from thought to response. Next, name what is happening within you. Use simple, honest words. I'm irritated. I feel hurt. I'm becoming defensive. I want to prove my point. Naming the feeling doesn't mean the feeling is wrong. It does not mean that you should ignore it. It simply helps you recognize what may be entering the conversation with you. Then return your attention to the person or situation in front of you. Listen again. Read the message again. Notice what was actually said rather than only what your first reaction told you it meant. Pause, name, return. Imagine receiving an email that irritates you. Your fingers begin moving across the keyboard and every sharp sentence feels completely justified. Then you notice the gap. You stop for one breath. You name what is happening. I feel dismissed. I want to defend myself. Then you return to the email and read it again. The issue may still need to be addressed. A boundary may still need to be stated. But now your response can come from a clear understanding of what is happening, rather than from the first rush of emotion. The same practice can change the way we listen. While another person is speaking, notice when your mind begins building its response. Pause. Name the impulse. I want to interrupt. I want to give advice. I want to tell my own story. Then return your attention to the person who is still speaking. Sometimes your thought will return when they finish. Sometimes it will change. And sometimes you will realize that it didn't even need to be said at all. Minding the gap does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean remaining silent when something important needs to be said. The gap does not take away our voice. It helps us become more aware of what we are bringing into the conversation before we use it. Sometimes we speak, sometimes we ask for more time, sometimes we listen, and sometimes no response is necessary. Not every thought needs to become words. Not every opinion requires our opinion, and not every silence needs to be filled. This week, simply practice noticing one gap each day. Pause, name, return. That is enough to begin. The gap may last only a second, But within that second, we can notice what is happening inside us before it becomes part of someone else's experience. We may soften a sentence, listen a little longer, recognize an old reaction, or realize that what we were about to say doesn't need to be said at all. There will still be times when we react too quickly, speak too soon, or send the message we should have saved as a draft. When that happens, the next gap is still there. We can notice it, we can repair what needs to be repaired, and we can begin again. Other people may never notice the pause, but they experience the words, tone, or actions that follow. The people in our lives may never see the quiet work taking place between a thought and a response, but they experience it through our words, our patience, and our willingness to listen. So this week, mind the gap. Pause, name what is happening within you, then return to the person or moment in front of you. The gap may be small, but becoming more present within it can, over time, change our lives and the way we interact with the world. I appreciate you joining me today. If this episode encouraged you, please like and subscribe, and do share it with someone you care about. Until next time, remember, your first thought does not have to become your first words or actions. Mind the gap. This is a Karen Shaw podcast where we expand the mind and grow the heart. I'm Karen Shaw. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.